Hello everyone and welcome back to Average Nerd Talks. Now, after my previous video, some of you said in the comments that you want to see less face and more of Bazzite, which is perfectly fair. Just to give you a bit of a background though, I know a lot of you think that Bazzite is primarily for, handheld gaming devices like a Steam Deck or a Legion Go or an ROG Ally or something. But Bazzite is a perfectly capable desktop OS, and I have been using Bazzite for quite a while now. So I figured, you know what, I'll just show you what it's like and walk you through what it's like to use as a daily driver. So when you first install Bazzite, it's probably not going to look something like this. You'll probably see a welcome screen and a wizard to guide you through setting up Steam and other devices. The desktop wallpaper by default is a little different too. I think it's, let me see, it's this one, yeah. So it'll kind of look like this is the wallpaper, but you know what, you can always change that. So I kind of like the built-in ones that they've provided. I really like this one, which is called Flow, so I just use that. You can use absolutely whatever you want, but yeah, up to you. Anyway, so from a day-to-day, usage perspective, it's literally like any other desktop OS. Okay, it's basically just Fedora 42. So under the hood, it's not all that different. The only difference between Fedora 42 and something like Bazzite is that Fedora 42 does not come with a whole lot of quality of life features which you would probably have to install and set up after you're done installing Fedora. That's something Bazzite just does for you out of the box. Now, going into gaming, I haven't done anything special here, so the only thing that I did was installed my games and started playing. I haven't installed any crazy packages. In fact, I installed Piper recently to configure my mouse, right? And it just works, which I had to do a lot of fiddling around with Fedora to get this to work with my mouse. So yeah, Piper just works perfectly fine. So recently I've been playing Satisfactory a lot, and I've been playing a fair bit of Cyberpunk as well. So let me show you what it's like to actually play, a game. And this is again just install and play. I didn't change anything here. In fact, I'll show you. Like, I haven't changed any of the launch options. I have changed literally nothing. And just click install, just click play. Now, if you noticed up top, the FPS counter up there, that thing has been updated in Steam, and I think it's pretty cool. So I have capped my frame rate to 90 because I honestly don't. Let me remove my face from here because I think that's not what you want to see. So I have capped the frame rate to 90. You can cap it to something else because, like, you know what, I don't really need something higher than 90 for this game, and I just wanted to essentially have a stable, smooth playing experience. So I'll just click continue here so that you get to see what the game looks like while it's being played. Now, of course, there will be some frame rate dips and drops when I am actually capturing my screen. It shouldn't be very egregious. So yeah, it works fine. I mean, I haven't personally found anything like terribly wrong while playing the game. I have found the frame rate to be relatively very stable. Now, this video is in 30 frames per second, so what you are seeing is in 30 frames per second, but it's running at about 90 frames per second on my computer, and it's pretty stable. It does go up and down once in a while, but I think that's more of an artifact due to recording rather than anything else. Now, coming back to the desktop, let's just quickly try Cyberpunk 2077 because I know that's a very popular game that people like to test. So let's get right into it. I'm just going to hit play and let's see how it works. Now, Cyberpunk, I have uncapped the frame rate just so that you can actually see how it runs. I'm just gonna drive a bit and like see how it's actually running so that you can actually see what the game is like, what it feels like to play. I don't see any stutters. The frame time graph is pretty much flat most of the times. I'm just gonna drive through the city. I don't think I'm following any directions here.
Last year, the City Council of Night City absolved 32 corporations of income tax. More technology.
Alright, so that's kind of what it looks like. I'm going to show you the settings just real quick, just so that you have an idea as to what, you can expect. Just based on my configuration, I haven't enabled any resolution scaling or anything of the sort, no frame gen, no ray tracing either. I don't see it adding much of a useful, graphical fidelity or anything to the game. I don't think it improves how the game looks very significantly until you turn on path tracing. But at that point, you're just sacrificing performance for like very little gain. So, I've set everything else to high and ultra in most cases. So it's usually like fine and it runs just great on my system. So I don't really fiddle around too much with it. So that's Cyberpunk for you. That is what gaming is like. Now, I also do a fair bit of development work. So I do have VS Code installed, which works just fine. I haven't actually changed anything here significantly. So yeah, it is what it is. Besides that, the terminal is perfectly fine. I'm using something called Fish as my terminal and not Bash, which is the default, which is why it kind of looks different. I'm also using something called Starship. So, okay, if you really want to know, you can go to starship.rs and you should be able to customize your terminal and make it look like, really fancy if you want to. Now, if you're planning to use Bazzite for some development work, then it doesn't always come with all of the tools that you would need to get to work straight away, right? So the way to actually get to that is you go to, or you look for, essentially, Bazzite DX. This is what you want. So all you got to do is select your image. So in my case, I'm using an AMD GPU. So I will select AMD. I'm using KDE. And I'm using, other developer. I'm basically a developer, right? So you just click on Rebase and scroll down here. So what you need to do is essentially just copy this and paste it in your terminal this way. Press enter. Now I'm already on Bazzite DX, so I'm not going to press enter here because I don't want to rebase to something that I already am at. So yeah, so that's all you need to do, and it's going to basically install Bazzite DX for you. All right. Now, another really cool feature which I think Bazzite provides, which other operating systems should probably look up, is this tool called UJust. I think that's how you pronounce it. But the way you use it, it's pretty interesting. So all you got to do is go here and type in UJust. Now what this essentially does, it gives you a list of commands that are available to you. So for example, if you just want to update your system, there's this command called update here. If you want to install some kernel level stuff, like for example, cooler control, or you want to install OpenRazor, OpenRGB, oversteer, which is something you'd need if you have a Logitech steering wheel or something. All you really got to do is you just, let's say I want to just update my system. I do you just update, and it's going to start updating the system. And, I don't really have to touch anything. It just like does whatever it has to do, and that's it. So yeah, don't get me wrong. Bazzite does auto update by default, so you can turn that off if you want. But the you just update command basically just does the same thing manually. Now, for those of you who don't want to, touch the terminal and have this thing do updates for you, what you can do is go to the start menu and just type in update, and there's a system update option here. It does literally the same thing. Okay. Now, you have to remember that since this is a immutable or atomic OS, everything is mostly a flatpak. So Spotify is a flatpak. All you got to do is install it and run it. Okay. So all of that remains pretty much the same. The system does not boot into a game mode environment. And that's, I think, something people seem to think is the default with Bazzite. It's the default if you download the deck image, but that's not what you're typically installed if you're going to install this operating system on your desktop, right? So if you go to bazzite.gg, I've mentioned this before, all you got to do is click download Bazzite, right? Select your hardware, which is in this case, so if you're not using a handheld, you'll probably be clicking desktop, or you'll be probably, clicking on laptop if you're using this on a laptop. So all you really got to do is click on desktop, click on your GPU vendor. Now, in my case, I am using a AMD GPU. So I click on this. I click on desktop environment. So personally, I prefer KDE, but if you like GNOME, then you can totally do that as well. Just click on KDE, and then you can choose if you want the gaming mode or not. So that doesn't mean that you're not going to get, Steam, what is that? Steam Big Picture mode or something. This has nothing to do with that. This just states whether your system is going to boot into Steam Game Mode or Steam Big Picture mode when it boots. So if you don't want that, just click no. Now all you really got to do is just download Bazzite, and you're going to get, your Bazzite stable image. Put it on a USB stick with either Ventoy or Rufus. If you are on Linux already, you don't have Rufus, you don't have whatever other tool, you can get this one. It's called Etcher, and you don't want to use Ventoy. I don't know why you would do that, but yeah, you could use Ventoy. This is Balena Etcher. You should be able to download Etcher for whatever system you have. So in this case, it's Linux. What you need is the app image. This one, again, it just works. But yeah, if you don't want to use Etcher, you can get to Ventoy. So what essentially Ventoy allows you to do is when you boot from your USB stick, it's going to give you a nice selection menu where you can have, say, 10 different ISOs for 10 different operating systems on your USB stick, and they're all going to show up in a list. You can just pick which one you want to boot from. Now, I do have a boot stick which I've created for literally this purpose. So this is a 128 gig stick which has Windows, Fedora, Ubuntu, Bazzite, and a bunch of other operating systems on it already. Now, another complaint that I hear from people is that typically in an immutable and an atomic OS, you cannot install system level packages using something like DNF. All right. So yeah, that is true. That's absolutely true. But Bazzite ships with Brew. So if you don't know what Brew is, if you've ever used a Mac, Brew is the default way for installing system level packages. All right. So Brew, install whatever package you want. For example, Vim. I mean, I already have Vim, so I don't know exactly why. This is probably going to install a duplicate version of Vim. Anyway, I can deal with that. So Brew is essentially just another package manager which you can, install CLI tools with. And something like if you want to install, say, npm or Vim, or you want to install Hugo, or you want to install Ruby, or whatever it is, you can just use Brew install to do exactly the same thing. And if Brew doesn't work for you, which is absolutely fair, you can use something called distro shelf, which is just a manager for distro box. So what this allows you to do is create containers. So now this here is an Ubuntu container, which means that this is an entire Ubuntu OS inside a container running on your system. So even if your system is immutable, you can actually have packages here. So this is literally running apt. It's essentially just Ubuntu as is, right? So you can install packages, you can do sudo apt install and whatever. It's just going to work the way you'd expect it to work in Ubuntu. If you don't like Ubuntu, you want to install something else, you can always do like another image. So I want to do Fedora here, right? So all I got to do is search for Fedora, click on, one of these options. I'm just going to pick one randomly. You can give it a custom home directory, which is something I recommend. So I have another folder called DistroBox in my home directory, and I usually create a separate home directory for each DistroBox that I have. You don't have to do this, but it just makes it so none of these DistroBoxes will mess with your default home directory. So, it's a lot simpler overall to deal with when you have a separate home directory for everything. Now you also get the whole Office suite here, and this is just something I'd installed with Flatpak. So you do get the Flatpak version of LibreOffice with, the whole suite. I don't typically use Office all that much, but I do have to use it occasionally to like mess around with some documents here and there, like if someone sends me something in a doc or a PPT or something, I'll probably use LibreOffice to open it. Now, another thing that doesn't come installed by default in Bazzite is virtualization. So if you run a lot of VMs and spin them up often, then you need QEMU and KVM, which is not installed by default. But this is simple enough to add. So all you got to do is type in you just set up virtualization, press enter, and it's going to do all the setup for you. You reboot your computer and it just works. Now, if you have an AMD GPU like I do, you do need something called LACT if you want to overclock it or, mess around with it in some way. So you can, check what your CPU statistics are. You can mess around with the clock speed. You can change whatever it is that you want, all of that. So the first time when you run LACT, it's probably going to ask you to install some kind of boot time kernel module, which you have to type in your password for, and it's just going to work after that. Now, on my system, I think LACT was installed by default, but suppose you don't have it, that's also a possibility. You just install LACT, and it's, I don't want to install it again because I've already done that. So LACT is already installed on my system, but all you gotta do is you just install LACT and it's just gonna work. I also use something called Cooler Control. Now this Cooler Control is actually a very cool piece of software which allows you to see your fans and your temperatures everywhere, basically all your sensors. And these fans can be controlled from here. So you can create profiles if you want, like fan curves and whatnot. Now I haven't used this software all that much because typically I don't mess around with my fan curves from the OS. I usually do that from the BIOS. But if you really want to, you can set up fan curves here. Don't ask me how to use this software. I know a lot of people who use it, but I'm not one of them. Now going back to gaming, I know I mentioned Steam, that just works out of the box. Heroic Games Launcher is something that I installed after the fact, after installing, Steam and everything. This thing is just literally a Flatpak. Now with Heroic, there's one little step that you should do and something I recommend because I've had trouble getting a lot of games to run straight away out of the box. Literally the only thing you got to do is go into Wine Manager and it says GE Proton latest, right? So there should be a download button here, kind of like this one, right? The download button that you see here. You'll see the same thing here. All you gotta do is click download. Once that's downloaded, what you gotta do is go to settings and click on game defaults and then set this to Proton GE Proton latest, okay? If you do Proton experimental or Proton hotfix, which is typically what Steam uses, then games don't seem to launch, and I don't know why. But this is something that's unique to Bazzite. Otherwise, once you're done with that, games essentially just runs. You just click play, and I mean, I can show you. Like, I was playing SWAT 4 just some time ago, so you just click play and it runs. And there it is. That's SWAT 4. All right. Um, So yeah, that's pretty much it. I don't think there's a whole lot here to talk about. Just that, from a usability perspective, Bazzite is just like any other traditional Linux desktop. The only thing is that it's atomic, which you can work around with Brew and Distro Shelf, which basically is just an implementation of Distro Box. But you get a full-fledged operating system which is very resilient to breakage. Now, I know many of you use CachyOS, Nubara, Ubuntu. Now, you may argue that, yeah, Nubara is stable, Fedora is stable, CachyOS is stable, they don't crash. Absolutely. But I just like how Bazzite has everything working perfectly out of the box with very minimal configuration. And that's not something that I want to do when I come back from work, right? All I want is a system that works perfectly where I can just click install, click play, and have my games running without ever worrying about it breaking. If something does break, and it has happened once where something that I wanted didn't happen, I don't want to get into the details of that. But all I really had to do was roll back to a prior snapshot that worked. It took me all of like 2 minutes to do to restore my system to a good working state. This is not something that's very easy in a system that's not atomic. Of course, if you're a tinkerer and you like to mess around with your operating systems, something like Cachy or even Arch, if you really want, those are great options. They are amazing operating systems which you can use for gaming. So yeah, all power to you. You should definitely use whatever it is that you want. And you're free to disagree with me. That's kind of how this works, right? When you use an open source operating system, you have choice. You can choose what you want to use. You don't have to use what I'm using. I'm just giving you my opinion on what Bazzite is, and maybe put some facts out there rather than these very vague and misinformed opinions that Bazzite is purely a gaming OS and it's only designed for handhelds. Now, Bazzite is definitely primarily designed for gaming, and I wouldn't use the word designed, I would use the word optimized in this situation. It is optimized for gaming, but that doesn't mean that you can't use it for other things. Now, yeah, my desktop, my primary use case is gaming. If I want to get work done, I use a Mac. Okay. But if I'm developing anything on my desktop, all of the work that I do is in either a distro box or a dev container. If you are using dev containers for all of your development work, then it doesn't matter whether you use a Mac, Linux, or Windows. Well, Windows, it's a bit iffy to get running. But if you're using a dev container, you can basically just use Bazzite or any Linux operating system or a Mac to get your work done, right? So I hope you guys enjoyed this one. I just wanted to cover what Bazzite is like to use as a day-to-day desktop OS. So yeah, let me know what you think down in the comments below. And if you like this, hit like. If you didn't like it, hit dislike. And I'll see y'all in the next one.